both my husband and my father lost their fathers when they were both 9 years old. And
Wow.
my husband's father was to a heart attack, and he found him on the sofa. So he had to experience, he did experience being unfortunately, the one that found him. And then my father lost his father to asthma, which turned into pneumonia. And his father was only 32 years old. He was a very young man. And then I escorted my father, helped him through his journey through passing. Welcome to Toni Talks Humanity Matters, where we delve into deeply human topics with the intention to create meaningful connections, elevate our awareness, open our minds, and improve our wellness so collectively we can reach our highest potential. I'm here with a special guest that I've been following and supporting for several years now. He's been called the Steven Spielberg of documentary. He's an Academy and Emmy-nominated filmmaker, most known for Hoop Dreams, which I have seen, and has worked in the film industry and the television business for 45 years. His latest film, Veterans Journey Home, highlights solutions for veterans to realize productive civilian life. His previous feature documentary, Journey from Zanskar, features the Dalai Lama with narration by Richard Gere. Who's Richard Gere, by the way? I don't know him. Other recent works, the feature film The Unspoken, the documentary miniseries Boys to Men, and the short film Rites of Passage all express deep concerns about teens realizing complete maturity. He was named a Chicago Tribune Artist of the Year, a Guggenheim Fellow, and a recipient of a Robert F. Kennedy Special Achievement Award. Very impressive. Welcome to my show, Frederick Marx.
Thank you, Toni. It's such a delight to be here with you.
Thank you. I am so excited. As you know, we've known each other for probably 6 years now. Is that about right?
Oh gosh, I think maybe even longer, maybe 7 at this point. But COVID time, who knows, right?
I think it was like dog years. It just kind of stretched out or something. But yes, yes. And perhaps we should just start with your background. I introduced you with some of the highlights. What would you like to add to that, Frederick?
Well, yeah, I think people can find me very easily on Wikipedia and IMDb, so you can learn pretty simply my professional background and, accomplishments. So I'll focus more on the personal. You know, in an important way, my life really began when I was 9 and my father died suddenly of a heart attack. And it was on the way to the funeral that his younger brother, my uncle, he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, "Well, Freddie, you're the man of the house now."
Hmm.
And, these days it's so easy to kind of scoff and say, "Oh my God, that's so inappropriate to say to a 9-year-old boy." And it is. But, I, of course, took that very seriously. And I wanted to do everything that I could to be supportive of my mother and to help my older sister and younger brother as much as I could. And of course, I was still in shock myself of losing my dad, who I never had a chance to say goodbye to. He was literally there one day and then gone forever the next.
Hmm.
So all of that fed into this turmoil of mine, which then, as I got older, I started acting out in adolescence, like so many teens do. And my uncle didn't stick around to show me how to become that man that I wanted to be. None of my father's colleagues at the University of Illinois, none of our neighbors showed up to support me in becoming that man that I wanted to be. So it really planted a seed for a lifelong quest for me to understand, how do I become the man that I want to be in this lifetime? And and so that's what led me into so many of the themes that have been huge in my life. Rites of passage being the key one. I desperately needed initiation into young adulthood as a teen, and I never got it. I desperately needed mentorship. And so I tend to think now of mentorship and initiation as two halves of one whole. both of them are required to help our young people transition from one phase of life into the next, into mature adulthood. So anyway, that's some of an answer to your question, but it became very clear to me only later in my life when actually I was supporting my late wife and escorting her to her death,
Mm-hmm.
that death really has been arguably the greatest teacher in my life. And I could probably talk for 5 minutes just about that journey with my wife, but I don't want to get too far ahead of your questions here.
Oh, quite all right. Wherever this leads us is fine, Frederick.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All
Mm-hmm.
right. Well, then I'll speak to that just
Mm-hmm.
briefly. So the beauty of that experience for me, and I don't use that word lightly, it was extremely beautiful. And it was um, some of the most poignant moments of my entire life were spent in those last few months with my late wife. And it was such a privilege to be able to be there and accompany her and support her and love on her. But the point that I'm getting to is that it was also part of my own healing journey because my father's death was so kept out of view. We didn't talk about it at all in my family.
Really? Hmm.
We did no sort of grieving collectively as a family. In fact, my mother thought it unwise for us to come to the burial. So we did attend the funeral, but we did not go to the cemetery to see his body put in the ground. And I understand why, she's thinking it's too traumatic and for the kids and et cetera. But um, to me, that was a missed opportunity to help put a little bit of closure, on this whole process. Anyway, because there was so much repression, so much mystery about death and dying that I inherited from my childhood, that escorting my wife to her own death answered for me. And I got to have a deeply intimate experience with death and dying. It just answered so many questions that were latent in me, that were unanswered. And again, it became such a fulfilling experience that it sort of tied a beautiful knot on this whole issue of what does it mean for humans to experience death and dying. So my first book, called At Death Do Us Part, in a sense became the arc of the journey in the book, from my father's death to my late wife's death, and all of the accumulated wisdom that accompanied me along the way.
Certainly. That is boy, that's very deep and moving, and what a lot to shoulder as a 9-year-old boy. I can't imagine. And it's not a coincidence. I don't believe there are those things, but both my husband and my father lost their fathers when they were both 9 years old. And
Wow.
my husband's father was to a heart attack, and he found him on the sofa. So he had to experience he did experience being unfortunately the one that found him. And then my father lost his father to asthma, which turned into pneumonia. And his father was only 32 years old. He was a very young man. And then I escorted my father, helped him through his journey through passing. And that was beautiful. So when you're saying with your departed wife, how beautiful it was, I think that's such an eye-opening, mind-opening thought for people to take, is that it really can be. There's so much fear around the dying process, and people, I mean, down to simply people don't know what to say to someone like, "Oh, Frederick, you just lost your wife. I'm so sorry." And then some people disappear because they don't know how to handle it. They love you, but they don't know what to say to you. Um, and then some people just have are do their best and say all the wrong things and all of that. I mean, you probably went through all that. What was your biggest learning? You said it answered a lot of questions for you. What was the biggest question that your experience with your wife did answer for you from that was residual from your experience losing your father.
Yeah, well, I have two answers for you. One is um, that death need not be feared, and that it's actually possible to see death as an ally, as a friend, as a supporter, because it's inevitable for all of us. And right?
Yes.
And we all know that, but we act as if we don't believe it, right? That it's not,
Hmm.
it's always about other people. It's coming for them, but not necessarily for me. Well, sorry, I've got bad news for you. It's coming for
Right.
all of us.
How do
So
we not know that?
how do we not
How
accept
do
it
we?
and live with it
Right.
deeply, right?
Right.
It's because
Yes.
our culture is so much into denial, and that and it's almost gotten to the point where it's like if we die, we failed somehow. The culture sort of teaches us that. And certainly the medical industry reinforces that to some degree. Now it's shifting now, and I'm grateful for that, to where, it's not failure on the part of doctors, and the medical system. If someone dies, this is the natural course of events. It's just a question of when and where and how. So anyway, so that's one thing, that it's possible to get intimate with death and begin to harvest the fruit of that relationship with it so that we more deeply appreciate every living moment of our lives and understand how uniquely precious and a wonderful gift that it is. So that's the deep answer. you
I
know
love deep answers. Good.
Well, the more superficial answer is, and you were sort of alluding to it yourself, people will say the most inappropriate things. And, uh, my late wife and I had a wonderful laugh about one of her friends who told her as she was dying, you don't know how this is impacting me.
No. Oh no.
And so, yeah,
Wow.
Tracy and I had a good laugh about that. Uh, so what happens, and we have to understand this, is because we're not culturally trained in how to deal with death, if we're not conscious, we'll get into our own conscious fears and denial and act out of that. So, in other words, and I'm sure we've all experienced this to some degree when you have some illness, much less when you're facing death. Everyone comes at you with, oh, well, you just need to take these vitamins and do this special drink and you'll be fine. It's all coming partly from a good place. Obviously, they want to be supportive, but it's also coming from a place of non-acceptance where they can't accept a very simple human reality of someone they love dying. And if we could fall more deeply into that acceptance, it would make all of our relationships that much deeper and more meaningful.
Yes, I totally believe that to be true. And back to your one comment about the medical system, and I've had so much experience in dealing with them as well, and I do believe it's well intentioned, most of it, and some of it's really all about money and the pharmaceuticals and such. It's my experience that the medical system, the culture around it, tries to get every last dime out of that dying family, every last dime, and throw things at, oh, let's try this chemo regimen, and let's do this, and let's make sure that your mother has the best dental care while she's in hospice. Why do that? If she's in pain, that's one thing, but I think it's looking at the quality of life of that person and supporting that person. For example, with my father, I told him he had multiple myeloma, and so it was literally it shattered all the bones in his body. Very painful process. And I spent 5 full years with him. If you ever want to talk offline about it, that experience, it was traumatic and beautiful and everything all at the same time. And I told him, look, Dad, because the doctors say you need to do this, you have to do this. I said, Dad, you don't have to do anything. This is your life. This is your transition. If you want to just say, Toni, I'm going to call it a day, I'll support you on that.
Good for
Whatever
you.
you want. You do not have to take the drugs. You can try whatever you want to try, but so we just closed up shop. Like, let's lean into your business. Let's sell your assets. He cleaned out his whole home so I didn't have to deal with a lot of stuff, all the material stuff at the
Nice.
end of the day. And like the saddest thing to me is like, I don't want to have a garage sale and have all of his stuff on the front lawn. And it's like, well, that's all there was of John Julian. There's all of his crap for everybody to see on the front lawn and pick through. How undignified. So I have this very different perspective of it going into it, and now helping my husband with the transitioning of a slow transitioning of his mother. But
Mhm.
what do you think about all that?
Well, I think it, it's definitely part of denial that so many people that we know and love do not think through their own dying.
Mm,
And they don't realize that by being in denial themselves, they're going to be creating a heap of trouble for their own heirs. So it's so important, that we think through what are we going to do with all of our assets? How are we going to divide them? And we think through like Tracy did. She started giving away systematically all of her stuff to the people that she most cared about. And she thought so deeply, who gets this painting? Who gets this article of clothing? Who gets
oh,
this treasured piece of jewelry? And she made each gifting a ceremony in a really rich way. So we need to be able to do that. My present beloved, I have a wonderful girlfriend now in my life. She's in Puerto Rico as we speak, dealing with what seems to be her own mother passing.
mm,
And
mhm.
her parents have themselves done very little in the way of advanced directives, for example. And she's in hospital right now on oxygen. And we don't, as her family, we don't know exactly what her wishes are. So
Oh.
those are the kinds of bequests that we're leaving unintentionally to those we love if we do not consciously engage with our own passing and make arrangements.
Absolutely. And it brings into play the capacity of that person when they are in that transition as to their ability to do that. And your late wife was very able to turn it into an absolute beautiful thing. Bless her heart. She sounds like a lovely person. And then some people have dementia and issues, and then they are no longer capable of not only saying, where do these things go, but do I want to be on life support? Do I want to be tube fed? Do I want to be resuscitated or do I not? What's the level of care that I want? And so that I think is hard because it leaves, and you've probably seen this, but doesn't it leave the family in fear, not knowing, guessing?
Yes, it's never too soon to make those arrangements. That's what I always tell people. It's never too soon. So I don't care if you're 30 years old. You can do it now because that's the fact. Death does not arrive with a save the date notice, you know?
Right. Nope,
So
never
we
does.
never know. We never know. And actually, this gives me an opportunity to sort of segue into the project that I'm working on now and talk about it because that is one of the themes that I hope will emerge from the film is that we'll actually experience people of all ages who are dying. The working title of the film is It's Your Wonderful Life, and it's about life honoring celebrations. So the whole idea is, some people call it living funerals or living wakes, is
Hmm.
that let's not wait till someone is dead and gone before we gather as family and community and sing their praises. Let's do it to their face while they're still alive. And let's make a beautiful community ritual out of it. So we did this for Tracy before she passed. It turned out to be 12 days before she died. And if you go to my website at warriorfilms.org and you click on It's Your Wonderful Life, you'll see the 2-minute little teaser we have for this project. I use footage that I filmed from that event to show her family and friends coming out to support her and say, "You changed my life, and here's how you did it." I think every human being not only wants to hear that before they pass, but they deserve to hear that. We all deserve to experience to some degree the ripples of impact that our lives have made on those around us. So that's what the film is about. And I want to film life honoring celebrations that are different, every different imaginable modality of them that exists, because I'm not invested in any particular way, shape, or form. And with all the different religions, all
Hmm.
the different spiritual traditions and atheists too. I want to film all those. And I want to film them all at different ages too, people who are dying, because as horrible as it is, we know children die all the time
Yes.
and of
Hmm.
terminal illnesses.
Hmm.
So I so want to film a child's life honoring celebration where all their friends from third grade, let's say, show up and say, "Joey, you're a good guy," however they put it. I want to film that, and I also want to film a prisoner, someone who's dying in a prison of a terminal illness and will not get out before they die, who's been a leader and an elder in their community, and to see all of the fellow prisoners come out and love on that person before he or she passes. So those are some of the things that I'm really looking forward to filming.
Boy, those are some intriguing scenarios, aren't they? They really are. So how are you finding these people?
Well, that's the challenge.
Right.
I've hired
Right.
some researchers, and we're going at it as best we can by contacting institutions like Kaiser, and seeing if we can't get into their hospice groups and their palliative care groups, and to
Hmm.
let them know what we're doing so that they can lead us to potential subjects. Talking to death doulas and death doula associations, who do beautiful work in assisting people in their transition. Um, and also, there's nonprofits out there. I went to a conference in November called End Well in Los
Hmm.
Angeles. And I met a number of people in nonprofits who support those passing. So one in particular comes to mind. They help teenagers with cancer. So I let them know what I'm doing, and I'm hoping that they can lead me to stories.
Yes, I would imagine that it would take someone who would be open to inviting people they don't know into their lives. But you are such a good, kind person. I can imagine that hopefully wouldn't be too big of a hurdle. You know what I mean? Having somebody being filmed. But on TikTok, I don't know if you've seen it, but there are, and what I love about this, and this ties in very much with what you're doing, there are individuals that are going through chemo, going through the dying process, and they are sharing it themselves. Little snippets of this has happened to me today, and I went through chemo, and I'm saying goodbye, or, this is my mother. I'm finding that people are, in general, becoming much more open to sharing that versus just being very, I don't know whether it's denial, but just very private, or whether there's shame around it, or whether they don't know how to handle it, so they don't really know how to be around other people
I
in
think
that
COVID is
situation.
responsible for that.
Interesting.
I wrote about this in my second book, the last chapter of my second book. It's all about rites of passage, and in any given normal human lifespan, we all go through 7, 8, or 9 different rites of passage, right? From birth into childhood, childhood into puberty, puberty into adolescence, adolescence into young adulthood to middle age to eldership, eldership to death at minimum, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the last chapter of the book is called COVID-19 and Our Planetary Rite of Passage. And I think that one of the key features of COVID was how it brought that awareness of death and dying smack into our faces where we could not look away, right? And I
Mm-hmm.
actually think that that was a good thing in many ways, because I think, as we can recognize, humanity needs to grow up, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Grow up.
Humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Well, go ahead. Yeah, we're just stuck in adolescence, right? So much of humanity is stuck in adolescence where it's about me, right? And we need to grow up to take the next stage of human growth into us. It's about us together as community. You know, your welfare affects mine and vice versa. So we need to all come back to that basic understanding. So anyway, I think COVID-19, again, was really responsible for a lot of that awareness about death for people now.
I think we needed that shakeup. As hard as it was for so many people, I'm not taking away the fact that it was very traumatic for many, not being able to see their loved ones in hospitals or in assisted living facilities and that kind of thing, and the isolation and the loneliness and the depression and people that became very unhealthy. Some people, not me. So a lot of people I knew became really unhealthy because it was challenging for them. But I feel like, perhaps humanity goes through these shakeups rather intentionally to equalize us out, which is what we needed, all this kind of lower vibrational, negative energy, things that are going on in the world, and gets us to realize our and appreciate what we have and that connection. And I just remember it was Mother's Day and we were 3 months into the lockdown, and I hadn't seen my children. I have 4 kids. Had not seen them for 3 months. Our youngest was 23 and our oldest was 33. And my husband said, "Everybody, we're going to jump on a Zoom call. We're going to talk to mom." And I was so excited because, of course, I hadn't seen them. And they were all in their cars. And so, what I didn't realize is that they were going to do a drive by the house. And I ran outside and they all drove by, "Mom, happy Mother's Day." And I'm like, "No, no, no, you get your asses in the house. You're not driving by." I was bawling. I was crying so hard. I miss them so much. And I don't think I realized it until I actually saw them, but I was like, chokehold, get in the house. So it was,
Right.
there was this shakeup, and yes, it put death and dying right front and center and our health. And what I didn't like was the all the fear that was instilled and propagated through the media to keep us tamped down. Do you wanna talk about that?
Oh gosh. Well, that's certainly a rich vein of discussion for sure. Yeah. Well, it, what that leads me to, frankly, is thoughts around political manipulation, really.
Well,
Because,
absolutely.
because
Mhm.
the fact of the matter is, when people live in fear, they're subject to being manipulated far more easily. And that's something that we all need to be aware of. Uh, so, I ask myself all the time, and don't get me wrong here. I think, you know, to understand the emotions, that we all have a rich emotional life, and it's important that we gain mastery of understanding of our own emotions, which isn't to say hide, repress, and deny them. So fear is as human as it gets, and fear
Yes.
has so many advantages for us, right? It helps keep us safe. It
Mhm.
tells us don't go there because those people or that place might be unsafe. So don't go there, you know. So that's really essential information. But it's also essential that we understand when we're feeling that fear and then sometimes override what the fear seems to be telling us that has to be done. So, you know, so that we can, as adults, make more rational, more reasoned, more wise decisions about what needs to happen. So, you know, for myself, I will often, if I get confused on some issue and I'm having trouble making a decision, I'll drill down into my deepest being and I'll simply ask myself, am I coming from a place of fear or love?
Mm-hmm.
And and if it's fear, again, that can be okay because maybe there really is something unsafe that I need to be careful about. But oftentimes, what I'll find is, in fact, it's not the case. It's a fear that's based on past experiences that don't apply in this present reality. And therefore, I can and should come from a place of love and acceptance and say, I'm down, I'm in, let's do it. So those are my sort of superficial thoughts on that
Well,
subject.
yeah, those are fantastic. And I think about given those types of situations, if we're not aware that we are being manipulated or programmed or coerced, or because sometimes it's not overt, sometimes it's not obvious, and the obvious is, oh, there's a fire, run. Oh, there's a man with a gun, run. Those types of things, we all are. It's very easy to say, yes, I'm fearful because of that, but to have this low level, constant, chronic fear. I know people that walk around on this earth scared of everything and afraid of dying and afraid of so much. And just to kind of loop back, I had another tangent of a thought, which is, isn't it interesting when people don't plan for their death and the families are so upset and afraid and vulnerable, and then they end up buying the most expensive casket they can, and they end up making these decisions because they're pressured at a point in time where they're vulnerable and it wasn't thought out, and they're either feeling guilty or sad or all of those things, right? And they make decisions that, and I think part of it is our brain chemistry when we're under chronic stress. The amygdala shuts down, our prefrontal cortex, and we can't really rationally think we're in that when we are in that state of stress. And so I think it all just kind of feeds into each other.
Totally. You know, I assume you've had discussions about this with many of your guests, but I think it's so important to really consciously regulate the intake of news media
Absolutely.
that you have, because the
Hmm.
news media is based on fear. That's how they make money, is that
Hmm.
they can get people afraid, they'll get them coming back, you know, like junkies, you know, because what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next, right? They're in such fear. So
Yes.
it really is, I think, an important step to take, not only for our own personal well-being, but to, in effect, sort of deny some of these corporations, which are like vampires, making fortunes off of our fear. So to deny them those profits, I think, is also important.
I think so too. I had this little experience last week. I was going in for a well woman's exam, and I don't watch regular television at all. I'll watch little mini series and a lot of PBS British shows, and I don't know why. But anyway, I just went in and there was the television was playing and there were ads and the news, and because I'd been away from it for so long, I was sitting there looking at it and I was just horrified. Like, oh my gosh, instilling fear, instilling fear, instilling fear, instilling fear, from the ads to the pharma ads to any sort of ad to the programming to the news. And then it's not enough that you can watch it once a day, but they run the same, they reiterate it over and over again every hour, over and over again. And so I think about people, like, I know my mother-in-law, being elderly, she would watch the TV and then come to the dinner table, and all that she would talk about is the mass shootings and the politics and I'm like, "Oh my gosh." I said, "You really must watch something else, please." I just couldn't take it. It was so negative and so depressing and so down. And, if we want to feel good about ourselves, and, I know you've dealt with a lot of the veterans and depression and suicide and that kind of thing. I do want to talk with you about yet is that, we need to elevate ourselves, and we're not going to elevate ourselves if we're watching media that puts us into fear and brings us down and lowers our vibration. And then we get depressed and we eat crappy food and we don't exercise. And it's just this cycle that people can get into.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah. So it's important for us to break that cycle, you
Mm-hmm.
know, to make a
Yeah.
stand for our own well-being and for others, by cutting off that addiction to news media.
Yes. And you know what you said earlier, which really resonated with me? You talked about being heart-centered. Which I love. I talk a lot about that in all my courses and all of my Zoom calls and all of my one-on-one private client sessions. I talk about being heart-centered. It's so important versus the old mindset, the old construct of look out for yourself to we're going to look out for everybody around us. And I love the word equanimous because it's you're not the decisions you make are for the betterment of everybody, for the highest good of all, right? So how does that weave into some of the work that you're doing and some of your inspirations and passions in life?
Interesting. You know, my parents were both professors. And so, in a sense, I was raised with the notion that do anything you can with your mind, but don't necessarily do anything with your hands or your body. I mean, not literally, but those were sort of the inherited lessons. And one of the great junctions I came to in my life, which interestingly enough happened when I was just on the precipice of my 40th birthday. And I had what I considered to be my long overdue initiation into mature masculinity through a group called the Mankind Project, a weekend workshop called the New Warrior Training Adventure. Subsequent to that life-changing event, I realized that my greatest gift is not my brain. It's actually my heart.
Absolutely.
It's my
Uh-huh.
heart. And having that in my conscious awareness has been extremely helpful in what are now almost 30 years subsequent to that event. So my films, I think anybody with a just kind of a cursory glance would see that over the last 20 years in particular, they're more and more emotional. And
Good,
I tell
good.
people, like my Journey from Zanskar film, I just introduced it the other night at a theater. I said, this is a three hanky film. You better have those hankies ready. I'm giving you advance notice, right?
Wow.
So,
Mm-hmm.
but the other avenue of thought that your question leads me to, and I talk about this too in my second book, which is called Rights to a Good Life, is about sovereignty. And it's very interesting, when I look around the world right now and I think about the archetypes that people like Robert Moore set up for us through his work in the neo-Jungian archetypes. So he published a book in the early 90s called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, and basically talking about how every human being manifests those four archetypes in different ways at different times. And some of us are quite uh, what's the word I want? Depleted in a given archetype quality. And some of us are overinflated. We over dramatize, or overact. So the intention is that we all be balanced across all four of those archetypes because we need them all. And I won't go into explaining each one and what it means and whatever, but the sovereign one, the king, the queen, that's the one I'm focused on here. And that is the one that, if you look around society, is the most diminished at this point in time, right? Where are the sovereign leaders? We do not see them in our political landscape. We do not see them in our corporate landscape. We hardly see them in institutions at all. The people who are looking out and saying, what is best for all of us? Not what is best for me, what is best for all of us right now? And how can we sit down together and come to terms and figure that out collectively so that we can act on that? That is huge. And as far as my personal journey with that goes, I had a mentor tell me once, he said, Frederick, you're pretty balanced across the other three archetypes, warrior, magician, lover, but you're pretty diminished in the sovereign. And that's,
Really? Huh.
yeah. And he said, and that's one of the hardest to acquire. And, this is going back now over 15 years ago, but I consciously set out to develop that sovereign quality in myself. So I like to think that I'm pretty balanced there now as well. So, the characteristics of the sovereign, and this is one way that we can all, including your listeners, manifest this in our everyday lives, is blessing. It is so important that we bless each other and ourselves, because this too has fallen away from active society, from our daily social interactions. And we are all starved, hungry for this kind of human connection through blessing. So, and it has to be something that, and I talk about this a lot in my second book, but it has to be something that is uh, specific to the time and place and person. So it's not enough to just give an award to some kid and say, thank you, good job. We need to say, Bobby, I saw how you actually acquired the skills of mathematics that you actually were struggling with tremendously before, and now you're acing all these math tests. I want to say to you, I see you. I see you. I see how hard you've worked. And I want to bless and honor you for putting in that effort, because that is what's going to help you become the man you want to be in this lifetime. So we need to say things like that to each other on a regular basis.
That is so powerful, really powerful. And imagine, how maybe when you were younger, as I was when I had a teacher that said one good thing to me, coming from a life of abuse and a mental health challenged mother, and abandonment and all kinds of things. But in spite of that, I had one teacher that validated me in that way. He didn't use the word blessing, but that was in the 5th grade. I was 10 years old, and I still remember it today. I still have a little card from him. I'm in my 60s now. I'm like, I still cherish that, that he had that faith in me when no one else, it felt like no one else did. And so that is so, so very powerful.
Yeah. Well, you remind me of, there's a Swiss psychologist who's written a number of books, and of course her name's escaping me right now, but the one that I first read uh, and influenced me dramatically was called The Drama of the Gifted Child. But it
Mm.
wasn't in that book. It was in a subsequent book, but she talked about exactly that. She said that we can make a life-changing intervention in anybody's life by simply stopping to give them a single blessing in any given moment of time. So, and she was addressing abuse as her subject matter. And she said that if, despite all kind of abusive parents and a horrible environment, if one person comes up to us at any time and says, Jill, you are a beautiful child of light. You do not deserve the misfortune that you have in your life. And it's important for you to know that you deserve goodness and happiness and love in your life. It can be as simple as that. And that could change because it becomes an anchor point, right? It sounds like it was
Right.
for you, an anchor
It
point
was.
to organize your life around going forward.
It was, and it was literally my salvation. It's like, "Oh, somebody sees me. Somebody sees me, and they value me for who I am." And I just think so many youth and, I know you've worked with teens, so many youth that go through life feeling lost because they never had somebody to emulate, right? To have that capacity to see a bigger picture and not just, be what's the word I'm looking for? Not abusive, but c diminishing someone, tamping out their
Belittling.
light, belittling, demeaning. Uh-huh. Right, exactly. That is
Yeah.
so powerful. Mhm.
Yeah. Alice Miller is the woman's name.
Alice Miller. Oh my gosh. Okay. I will have to
Yeah.
look that up. So, do you wanna talk about, in regards to death and dying, some of the veterans that you've worked with? Do you feel like that
Sure.
figures into this conversation?
Sure. Well, and it actually gives me an opportunity to offer a small blessing and thank you to you because
Oh,
that is how we met. We were
yes.
introduced by a mutual friend, and I was just starting out on the journey of my Veterans Journey Home film project, and you jumped right in and became a supporter of our project, a very significant supporter. So I want to thank you again because you helped make it possible. And what was originally just going to be a single film where we talked about the challenges that veterans face in transitioning into successful civilian life ended up becoming a 5 film series that I,
Oh, wow.
yeah, that I just finished 2.5 years ago.
Oh.
So for any of you out there who are watching, if you can go to our website and get the series, but you'll see Toni's name in the credits as a thank you because she helped make it all possible.
That's
So
fantastic.
yeah,
And I'll just say just to clarify is that um to add more value to the story is that my father was a veteran of the Navy and no, of the Air Force actually. And when he passed 6.5 years ago, we had leaned into the rock. We did develop a trust for him. He did say he wanted a certain amount of money to go toward something doing some good along the veins of the military. And so as I was researching, I put a feeler out to Bob Fung, who put us in contact with someone that you knew. And so you and I met for lunch. It was the first time I met you. I was so impressed with you and just had the feeling of because I'm very intuitive. You're just an exceptional human being. And so I had no problem saying, okay, from my father's trust, this is where I would like this to go. So it was an easy decision for me, once I met you. So I'm glad that it helped further everything that you're doing. And I just want to take a moment here too, is to let everybody know that, all of what Frederick is doing requires money. They are lobbying, isn't that right? You're trying to get measures passed, and can you talk about that with what you're trying to accomplish? You're trying to also get your films into the military bases, is that right?
that is right. So my company is called Warrior Films. We're a small nonprofit company based in Oakland, California. And our mission statement actually boils down to 4 words: bearing witness, creating change. So basically, what I do is I look for stories of human transformation, of people going from one stage of growth to another, and use those stories to make positive social change. So our veteran series, we're trying to alter the landscape for veterans. We're trying to posit the notion that, first of all, PTS is not a lifelong condition. A lot of the people in the medical profession will tell you, you've got it, that's it, you're going to always have it. That's not very helpful. So we
No.
try to posit the notion of post-traumatic growth. So the whole
Mm.
idea is that, yes, you have trauma, but so do so many other people. And depending on how you turn and face it, you can actually harvest fruit from that trauma. Just like I did eventually from harvesting fruit from my own father's death through my late wife as a kind of a surrogate teacher. So all five of the films focus on different rituals of return for veterans so that basically they can go through the rite of passage that is required of them to abandon their identity of service person and come into a new identity as an individual post-service. So that has a lot of different aspects to it, but one of them is mission. So they have to transition from a mission of service to the government and to the superior officers, the military's objective, to a self-directed mission of service. What is their individual human life calling for them that's unique to them? They have to find this, and we can help them find it and then act on that mission of service, right? So that's one aspect of it. But all five films focus on a different rite of passage, these different rituals of return to help veterans uncover their new civilian identity and then to go forward with confidence and with love in their hearts to enact this new identity. So that's the series.
That sounds amazing. And, you know, I think when people are in the armed forces, they really stuff their own identity in order to conform to all these rules, all these. My oldest daughter was in OCS, Officer Candidate School in the Marines, and
Hmm.
then became a San Jose police officer. And so she likes rules and that works for her. And she has her own identity, her uniqueness. But I think you're right. When people come out of that, they're like, who am I? Who am I now? How do I find my authentic self? And struggling with the trauma. And I know you were mentioning when we met that first time, the rate of suicide is quite high, isn't it?
Yeah, well, depending on the stats you read, it hovers around 22 a day,
Oh,
22 a day. And we've lost more veterans after their tour of duty than we have during their tour of duty. So, in other words, they've died in greater numbers at home in the US rather than in overseas areas of combat. That's extremely sobering. So, a lot of the brilliant teachers that I focused on in these films understand that and understand that at some level it's not actual death that they're seeking. It's a death to their identity of service person, and they desperately need a rebirth into a new identity. So yeah, that's I was going to say something else and now I forgot.
that's quite all right. I think we all need that kind of self-work. I'm doing this work now. Like what was my old identity? What do I want to release? What do I want to get rid of? What do I want to tell myself? And especially I did also have PTSD, being tear gassed and our house burning down and being attacked by neighbors and all kinds of things. So I went through a military type upbringing. I was only 12 years old when these things occurred. So very formative years. And so it is a growth. I love how you position that. It puts it in the positive. It lets people know they're not victims and that they do have power to change and shift and claim a new identity. And so even now, I'm doing self-work now. I am a powerhouse. I am, this. I am a money magnet. I am, whatever,
I
all
see
the I
that.
ams, all the affirmations. And I teach those to people too, as I know you must, because they are so powerful. It helps make things real. So,
You
can
know,
you,
yeah,
yes,
well,
go ahead.
I just want to say that I never use the D in PTSD
Right.
because it's disorder. And I refuse that notion that there's some disorder, there's some medical ailment that people who have post-traumatic stress have. No, this is normal. This is human life. We all are going to have trauma at some time or another.
Oh, yes.
So by getting rid of the D, we can focus on the growth. So what needs to happen now so that I can turn toward this experience and not repress it, not hide it, go through it. And
Right.
what lessons does it have to teach me about the person that I need to become? That's essential.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
And you know, you touched on this, but I'll just say it. The military is very, very good. They understand rites of passage, and they basically have civilians die to that symbolic identity of civilian and be reborn into new identity as soldier. And there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of advantages to that. That they understand community. They understand that the person on their left and their right is essential to their well-being. So they have to sacrifice their own life to keep them alive if they can. That's a beautiful lesson that all civilians need to understand and learn and can learn through initiation. But the point that I'm getting to is, so we give them boot camp as a rite of passage into this new identity as soldier, as service person. We do not give them reverse boot camp to get them into some new identity post-service that they deserve and need.
Right. Now, the programs that you're putting in place, the films that you're producing, is it to that end?
Yes, they're all about reverse boot camp. They
Mm-hmm.
all feature these different modalities of reverse boot camp. So just to give you, I'll try to make this brief, but you know, one of the films focuses on a Native American style vision quest ceremony where 12 veterans come into the desert of Eastern Washington. And in the middle of those 12 days, they go out on a solo journey for 4 days with nothing but a backpack, a sleeping bag, a tarp, and 4 gallons of water to drink every day, no food.
Hmm.
They fast. And then, so they have this experience where they can sort of begin to, again, symbolically die to that old identity and be reborn. We also have a film about 22 women veterans who do a 4-month meditation uh, uh, retreat, sort of. And we see them learn sensory awareness so that they're not subject to their bouts of PTS when they arise. They can begin to integrate that experience more meaningfully and fully into their ongoing everyday lives. So, and then we also have a weekend workshop film that we focus. There's a group in Milwaukee called Healing Warrior Hearts, and they teach a lot of these skills to veterans, and we see them transform over the course of a weekend. So those are some of the films in the series.
Yeah, those are so powerful. I have seen parts of what you're doing as you've been going along these years. I'm like, that looks interesting, especially that kind of the Native American, I forget what you call it, but
Vision Quest, yeah.
the Vision Quest. That looked really interesting. I'm like, yeah, Frederick's up to some good work here. So you have offered, I want to make sure we talk about, I just want to say the titles of all three of your books. One is At Death Do Us Part that you mentioned, as well as Rights to a Good Life.
Yes.
Turds of Wisdom. That is hilarious. I saw that. I started really laughing out loud. And can you just give us a little synopsis of that book?
Well, thank you for asking, because it's funny because I'm still a little bit shy about talking about that one in public. I'm so glad that it got a laugh out of you.
Oh,
Uh,
it did. It's a great
because,
title.
well, I can't tell you how many conversations I had before I published it. I'm I'm generalizing now, but most women, well, I'll start with men. I would say the title to they would laugh their asses off, right?
Yeah,
Most
yes, yes.
women, I would say the title to would like, ooh, like somebody just hit him in the side with a hammer, you know. So,
Not me. No, no, no. You know what? I'm very feminine. I loved the Turds of Wisdom. I
well,
just thought it just was perfect.
I'm glad you liked it.
Uh-huh.
So the subtitle says it all. irreverent real life stories from a Buddhist rebel. Okay. So basically, the book is my first humor book. And I talk about that, how it is that I want to turn a lot of the remaining years that I have left to humor. And I feel like if I can do nothing more than help people laugh during all of the horrors that we're surrounded with on a daily basis, then maybe that's enough. So there's stories of two kinds in the book. One are just memories that I have from my own life, where just to me, really funny and almost ridiculous, crazy things happened. So I recount those. And then the other is just kind of mini essays, blogs, really, on given topics of interest to me. And there is a theme of Buddhism that runs through it all, because that's one of the pillars of my life. So I talk about things like being on a long-term meditation retreat and all of the crazy things that can start to happen that I think are hilarious on meditation retreat. So that's one of the chapters, but there's many that relate directly back to Buddhism.
I love that. And I see excerpts that relate to Buddhism, and they always resonate with me. And I don't associate with any one particular, more spiritual, but I love it all. They all have just some wonderful, so much wisdom in it. So that is definitely a book I'm going to buy, Frederick. I'm going to go onto Amazon and snag that for myself and leave you a review. And so I just want to let everybody know that if you go to Amazon, and I will place a link under this interview, however you're watching it, whether it's on YouTube or on the podcast, I will make sure that that link is there so you can look into his books. And please also, if it resonates with you, contribute in whatever way you can to Frederick's mission. If it resonates, Frederick, thank you for doing so much good work out there, for elevating people, for bringing your wisdom and your experiences and your insights and your light. Your light is huge. And so I really appreciate it. And I thank you for taking the time with me this morning too. I think so far you're my, don't tell anybody, but you're my favorite guest so far. So
Well, thank you, Tony. I want to
yeah.
say that, we've had so few direct interactions.
Hmm.
Really, it was just that one time when we first met with Drew, and then you signed on to supporting the Veteran Series. So my recollection of you then is very, very different from my experience of you now. And I just want to honor you for what you've done for yourself, because you are so effervescent, you are so alive and sparkly, and you too radiate joy and light. So I want to say I see you and thank
Aw,
you.
thank you. Boy, you're making me tear up, which is a good thing. Good emotions. Thank you, Frederick, so much. Okay, thank you everyone for listening to Tony Talks Humanity Matters with my special, very special friend and guest, Frederick Marx. Be sure to check him out. And thank you for listening, and we will see you the next time around.